Welcome, listeners, to this special episode of the Organiser Podcast. Today, we commemorate and delve deep into a pivotal moment of India's freedom struggle, the spark that ignited Goa's liberation movement. On June 18, 1946, freedom fighter Dr. Manohar Lohia addressed a historic gathering in Margao, Goa, at a time when the people of Goa were enduring oppressive Portuguese colonial rule. Lohia's powerful call for civil disobedience and resistance marked the beginning of a sustained satyagraha that would eventually contribute to the Goa liberation. This day is now proudly observed as Goa Kranti Divas or Goa Revolution Day, a symbol of courage, unity, and the unyielding spirit of Indians against foreign domination. To guide us through the historical significance of this event, its context, its relevance, we are honored to have with us a distinguished expert on Goan history and the liberation struggle. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Sushila Savant Mendes. She is the professor of history, an accomplished author, researcher, and recipient of the Best Teacher Award for Excellence in Higher Education. With a doctorate from Goa University, Dr. Mendes has extensively documented and analyzed the freedom struggle in Goa, Portuguese colonial policies, and the contributions of leaders like Dr. Manohar Lohia and prominent leaders, professionals, and advocates in Goa. Her scholarly work and her passionate engagement with Goan historiography makes her the ideal voice to enlighten us on this important chapter. Dr. Mendes, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for your kind words.
Yeah, over to you, Doctor. Could you please take us through the importance of June 18, 1946 and why Goa Kranti Divas continues to inspire generations?
Goa Revolution Day is commemorated from that day 80 years ago, 18 June 1946, when Dr. Manohar Lohia, with his colleague and friend, Dr. Sushila Mendes, came to Goa. Now, there is a background to this, Kirti, because the association of Dr. Sushila Mendes and Dr. Lohia dates back to their student days in Berlin University, where Dr. Lohia was doing his PhD on salt and satyagraha, and Dr. Sushila was doing his MBBS medical degree. But right from that time, as 22-year-olds or 23-year-olds, they had that political consciousness which made them go together to the League of Nations Assembly, and in the observers gallery, they blew whistles, they threw pamphlets to protest against the address of the Maharaja of Bikaner. They said he was representing British India. So it was from that stage, more than 20 years before 1946, that this collaboration had begun. But it's spearheaded because when Dr. Lohia came back to Goa, he became leader of the Congress Socialist Party in India in 1934. 2 years later, he became the secretary of the Congress Foreign Department. And during this period, he published a lot of booklets like Swaraj Kya or Kaise, Government of the Foreign Contractors, on the struggle for civil liberties. Finally, the British government put him in jail for his association with the Quit India movement in 1942. He was incarcerated on 20th May 1944. And thereafter, he was released on 24th April 1946. So, as he was tortured in the Lahore prison, he was kept awake for days together, and 2 years was a lot of hardship in jail. So his friend, Dr. Sushila Mendes, decided to take him to his ancestral home in Asolna, Goa, for a small stay to rest. But Dr. Lohia, being what he was, is not a person who would just rest, realizing that in Goa, over the 400 years of Portuguese rule in Goa, colonial rule, the Goans in particular had no civil liberties. So he decided to jump headlong into the Goan movement. In fact, what he did was, as soon as on 10th of June, when they reached Goa by train from Bombay VT, a lot of Goan people went to, see them off. My parents went to see him off. There were many Goan well-wishers who realized that something is going to happen. It was not just a meeting, not just a coming to Goa for rest. And therefore, from the 10th onwards, there was activity in the ancestral house in Asolna in South Goa, which is still there today. The family lives there. And Dr. Julião used to come there during the month of May. So this time he brought Dr. Manohar Lohia in Goa. Now, from the 10th to the 18th, there were many days to prepare. And, news spread like wildfire in Goa through postcards, through editorials on newspapers, where the messages went in Konkani so that the Portuguese could not understand what was being messaged. So people came to Asolna to meet Dr. Lohia. There were many people who came. There were people from ideological backgrounds, but who had the politics of Goa in their command, like Mr. Purushottam Kakotkar, who later on became an MP, and Mr. Vasant Kare. They were members of the already existing Goa Seva Sangh. There were others like Professor Dionisio Ribeiro, Dr. Antonio Siqueira, the editor of Avos de Goa, the Voice of India, sorry, not Goa, but India. Evagro George was the acting editor of O Heraldo at that time. And he did a lot of work in publishing editorials about what was happening, which people were reading. Others closely associated were Dr. Lakshmikant Bembre, Advocate José Inácio de Loyola, Vincent João Figueiredo. So meeting these Goans helped Dr. Lohia to understand the local situation. He understood that there was need of action. There was debate, there was discussion whether it should be direct action or whether organization should precede action. But Dr. Lohia said very categorically that you have waited for more than 400 years from 1510 till now, 1946. Therefore, it is important that you act, direct action, and organization will follow this action. So a decision was taken to stage a satyagraha. Now, Kirti, you must understand this, that the 1946 18 June movement was not a movement to throw the Portuguese out of Goa. It was not an anti-colonial movement from that perspective. It was merely a protest to assert the fact that the Goans had a right to civil liberties, the right to think freely, speak freely, and write freely. So this was the only right that Dr. Lohia protested about, and he tried to make the Goans understand that if you don't have the right to hold protest meetings, forget protest meetings, you don't have the right to hold National Congress Goa meetings, because that was formed in 1928, much before. But by now it had, had different groups. So wedding cards had to be censored. So all the newspapers had to be censored. There was the Gomantak Times, which was edited by Dr. Julião Menezes, for some time by my father, Advocate Luis Mendes. So this newspaper would write in Konkani things which the Portuguese need not understand. So this was right from 1939 January. It was a group of young Goans in Bombay called the Gomantak Praja Mandal. And it had a manifesto with a program to fight for Goan liberation. So that was already there, the ground was already fertile. But for more than 400 years, such a big meeting in Goa of protest had never taken place. In the 400 years, there were small movements, revolts, you may call them, like the Kunkoli revolt in 1583, 15 July. There was also Matthews Castro revolt. There was the Pinto conspiracy. There were Rani revolts, uh, 4 or 5 Rani revolts. Some authors say there were about 40 revolts during this period, but all of them had narrow sectarian purposes. None of some were for protecting their religion, like in Kunkoli. The Rani revolt was for protesting against the high taxation and the invasion of their cultural practices. Male Castro and Pinto conspiracy was for the fact that the Goan priests were not given promotions in the church hierarchy, although they were well qualified and PhDs. But these were the reasons. This was the first time on 18 June, though it was a rainy day, there were people from all over Goa coming to Margao. In fact, when I went to the Nehru Memorial Museum and Library in New Delhi, there are photographs of this event. There are photographs of the posters to publicize this event. So it was rainy day, but people didn't bother. Understand one thing, Kirti, that coming here was at the cost of their lives, because the Portuguese had guns, their police, their military was there. So they came despite the fact that they could die. So in fact, when Captain Miranda, the administrator of Salsette, he pointed the gun on Dr. Lohia's head, he just put it aside and walked past. So that was a very brave act, because not only, I mean, the Portuguese, of course, did not want to kill Dr. Lohia. They didn't kill anybody that day. But that fear of getting killed was very much there, as was seen later in the satyagrahas that followed in 54, 55, where a lot of non-Goans who came to Goa were shot dead at the boundaries of Goa, at Patra Devi, at Kanakon, members of the Goa Vimochan Sahayak Samiti. So this is just the background that I've told you. And you'd like to ask another question, or can I continue?
Yeah. Dr. Lohia was an Indian citizen, so I think the Portuguese authorities must have been deterred against taking any harsh action on him for that reason also, because he was a British Indian citizen.
That is one reason. And secondly, Dr. Lohia was not an ordinary person. Mahatma Gandhi had written in the Harijan that, I may have my differences with Dr. Lohia, but I admire his courage of going to Goa. And, so there was worldwide, there was all India publicity for the man. He was already socialist leader accepted in India. He was he was a member of parliament, and he was not an ordinary citizen. So it's not just because he was a British. I mean, they didn't kill Goans also in the 46 movement, because killing Dr. Lohia would have invited the wrath of India on Goa way back in 46. So the Portuguese were well attuned to, understanding the geopolitics of that period, not only in India, in the world, so to say. So nobody had the courage to kill him.
Yeah, it was also just post World War II, and the Allies had a treaty, and NATO was nascent, I think, that time. So that also must have come into play. But
Well, this
Dr.
was
Lohia, yeah,
World
yes,
War
doctor.
II, yes. In fact, NATO that was one of the reasons. There were many reasons, but one of the reasons was the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, where
Yes.
the important members like USA and the European treaty members, if Pandit Nehru Pandit Nehru could, attack the Portuguese, and the Indian army was absolutely no match for what was left of the Portuguese in Goa in 1946. But he didn't do it because of these treaties like CETO, NATO, which the treaties are very specific that if any outside country attacked a member country, all the other treaty signatories would come to their help. So, since Portugal was a member, it was debatable, and it was understood that if India, free India, under Pandit Nehru attacked Goa, which was under the Portuguese, the NATO members or the CETO members could definitely come to the help of Portuguese.
Yeah. Also because Portugal did not call India, Goa, as a part of India. It called it as its own overseas territory. So
Yes, the
they,
term used. In fact, Salazar, he didn't speak much, but he wrote a lot. It is published in the booklets which I read in Tor de Tom in Portugal. The Sydney documents. The word Sydney stands for the secret police, which published this. He said that Goa was a province of Portugal, although geographically it was so far away from Portugal. He called it the overseas province of Portugal. So Salazar, was not like the French in Pondicherry and other parts of India, which had small territories in Chandranagore, Mahe, Pondicherry in particular. By 1957, they went peacefully because France itself was a democracy. Portugal was a dictatorship under Salazar. So forms of government were different, and therefore the way they handled their territories overseas were different. And therefore, Salazar, from 46 to 1961, Salazar never gave up Goa like the French gave up Pondicherry way back in 57. And Pandit Nehru believed that, with his prowess at the non-aligned movement and his international standing, that they would go peacefully. Nobody wanted a war. Nobody wanted a military aggression. Especially Pandit Nehru, when he spoke about peaceful coexistence of nations, the Panchashil, and when he spoke to the international body with the Panchashil, he couldn't be attacked as the person who had transgressed his own philosophy of international relations. So that took him more than 15, 17 years to finally decide that Salazar is a person who will not give up Goa just like that.
that just reminds me, Doctor, about how this Portuguese dictator Antonio de Oliveira Salazar ordered a scorched earth policy on December 1961 when Indian forces went into Goa and took over the rightful Indian territory. He asked the last Portuguese Governor General Manuel Antonio Vasallo de Silva. Silva de Silva, I could be making an error
Yeah,
there.
he's
To burn,
Vasallo is
burn,
Silva.
yeah, to burn the territory to cinders and not surrender,
Yes,
prevent that. So it was not the
yes,
love of the land or the people, but just the possession and dictatorship that he had over it, a kind of.
see, right from his professor's day, Salazar was a professor of economics in Coimbra University. Thereafter, in the 20s, he joined politics and started his own political party, the National Party of Portugal. And then he started the youth organization. He became the prime minister of the country. And he decided that, he's not going to let go of Goa. He passed a law called the Act for the Colonies in 1928. And all those political rights that Goans had before 1928, right from the 1910 period when the republic was formed and Goans were given equal rights as citizens. And he took away those rights because he called the Goans assimilados. The person on whom I have done my PhD, Luis Menezes Braganza, he wrote in his newspapers, O Debat and all, condemning the Acto Colonial, saying that this act belittles the Goans. The Acto Colonial also made Indians, Goans, be a part of the Portuguese army, pay the military tax, a lot of things which did not happen before 1928. So Salazar, in fact, when he realized that all was lost, and the last Governor General, Vasalio e Silva, was not anti-Goan to that per se.
Yes,
He
he refused.
realized also that he was not pro-Goan. He was the Governor General, but he did not want bloodshed. And he realized that his army, which had just one frigate called Afonso de Albuquerque, a ship in the Murmagao harbor, a few soldiers, not as much as the Indian army, he decided the best thing was to have a peaceful end. So he signed the peace treaty. Now, when I went to Portugal, I realized the newspapers of that period in Portugal showed photographs of the Portuguese praying in the churches that, Goa should be saved. Like as though, India was committing, of course, it was committing military aggression, but for more than 400 years, when Goa is a part of Portugal, Portugal treated Goa as its own. And therefore, they were praying in the churches, please save Goa, from the Indians, so to say. In fact, in one of the archives in Portugal, the old archives, when I saw a file called The Liberation of Goa, and when I opened it, it was about liberation of Goa from Pandit Nehru, from the Indian army. Yes.
The
So it was,
Wikipedia page still calls it annexation of Goa.
there are a lot of, Kirti, actually, there are a lot of people in Goa who still call it the annexation of Goa, who do not call it the liberation of Goa. And theoretically, it may have been that, but each one has a right to their opinion. I'm the daughter of a freedom fighter, so I would not call it that, but it is each one's viewpoint that we respect, and therefore there are people in Goa, there are Goans who say that, the rule under the Portuguese was much better than the present rule, and they have their reasons. Let us not dwell into present day Goa. So, yes, and so that Scotch policy you're talking about, it was like burn Goa, but the Governor General did not do it. He did things like, give a order to bomb the bridges so that the entry of the Indian troops would be, not facilitated. So many bridges like the Borim Bridge, the Kepem Bridge, they were bombed. And of course, the Indian military has the capacity to build bridges in a few hours. So that was not a problem. And the Indian military was attacking from all sides, not only from the north, but from the south and from Ponda, from all areas. So,
And the sea. And the
uh,
sea.
I presume, but it was all three: Air Force, Navy, everything that the Indian defense forces had. was utilized. But it was more
Actually,
land
actually,
attack.
actually, even Nehru was under fire from the Indians and Goan freedom fighters about having neglected, in single quotes, the freedom of Goa, the liberation of Goa, because Nehru had said that it's whatever reasons he had about NATO and all, he had said that it's like a pimple on the face of large India, a small problem.
Yeah,
But
but hmm,
yeah,
you can
but
proceed.
I was stunned to know that the Portuguese government even had not, they have continued to give passports to Indians in of Goa and offering them Goan, I mean, Portuguese citizenship. But I also read of some incident where they have been trying later on also to instigate people 50 years afterwards to try to become one force and then become the liberators of Goa again. GR, right? GR on the walls, Goan resistance everywhere, and encouraged clandestine resistance movement. I was stunned that in 2011 they tried that, nearly 50 years after that. Pleno
Uh,
Gralla, they called, the grand plan was called Pleno Gralla, covering Goa, Daman and Diu, in which the Portuguese colonizers wanted to assure Goans after liberation that they have not been abandoned by their former rulers. I think that's
uh,
very stunning.
Let me take it point by point. See, as historians, we look at history in a very non biased way. One good thing, in fact, there are many good things. When you look at the legacy of the Portuguese to Goa, whether it is architecture, music, dance, cuisine, even the language, the rich language, Portuguese. Uh, Goa is the only university which has MA in Portuguese for its students. So, besides all these positive aspects, this point about what you mentioned about the passports, it is, Kirti, the fact that the Portuguese have permitted Goans to avail of this facility to apply for Portuguese passports, not only if they are Goans, but even if their parents and grandparents were born before 1961. So it a lot of Goans have availed of this. In fact, before Brexit, half a lot of Goans utilized this, applied for the passport, and went to London and other parts of Europe like France. And today you will find a lot of Goans in the municipal council elections, winning elections in UK, in places like Swindon and London. There are so many Goans who have been elected because of the large Goan population in UK. Now, after Brexit,
Last
a lot.
Governor General also visited India very fondly and met people after he suffered exile in Goa, but I mean in
See,
Lisbon. But when he
Salazar,
came
of course.
back,
See, Salazar incarcerated him when he went back to England, to
for
Portugal.
not
He
following
was,
the orders.
yes, he was a dictator, Salazar. So the last Governor General is to be admired for his foresight in saving
Yeah.
lives. And
He was loved by Goans and he came back to meet them 25 years
not
later, I think.
yeah, not only came back. And see, we don't live from the abuses of history in the present times. It is we have to understand, like, see, the Vietnamese, they had
Yeah.
the Orange War, and people died, and babies were deformed for 20, 30 years, but today they are trading partners with USA. They've accepted
Yes.
the
Even
Roman
Japan.
script. Yes,
Even
so
Japan.
yes, so all colonial places, whether ruled by Portugal or Britain or France or Dutch, they have their terror. In Vietnam, I have seen the guillotine in the museum where the French used that, and the heads were collected in the baskets. So all the traumas of colonial excesses were faced. But do we do we say that the present Portuguese are remembered for the sins of their forefathers more than centuries ago? Definitely not. I'm a daughter of a freedom fighter. I went to Portugal, stayed there 3 months to do my PhD, and I realized that the Portuguese of today are so friendly to the Goans. In fact, the security guards at every archives I went said that, "Oh, you are a Mendes, you are one of us." So let us not live by the hangovers of the past. In fact,
Also, ma'am, when I was in Goa, may I interrupt you here? When you talked about the surname Mendes, is that a lot of my teachers were Noronas and Rodrigues and Gregs, and they said that to the um, to the credit of the Portuguese colonizers, unlike the Portuguese married into the local folds and gave them the elevation in their society. So they
uh,
assimilated as much as they could.
See, this was the policy of the Portuguese right from 1510, from the first Governor General, Afonso de Albuquerque. He encouraged his soldiers to marry local women. And that may be for different political reasons, because, the progeny of a mixed race will definitely have a loyalty
Yeah,
to
Saturday and
Portugal, and yes, the father being a Portuguese. So that has different reasons. But you are right that the Portuguese allowed the Goans to fight elections right from 1820, the actual elections taking place in 1822. I studied in the archives of the assembly of the Portuguese government, where they have kept beautifully all the caixas, the boxes of all the elections that took place in Goa. And the first three elected representatives were in 1822. Right down to the time that Portuguese left Goa, the British government never permitted the British Indians to stand for elections and go to Britain and represent them in the British Parliament. This was unheard of. But the Portuguese allowed Goan deputados in the Portuguese Parliament. So, if you study this, that's one of the reasons how the Goa Medical College came to Goa, right, the first in Asia almost, where the Goan deputado wanted things for the development of their motherland. So Francis Luis Gomes and Bernardo Pérez de Silva, Constancio Roque da Costa, Senior, Junior, all these people are made monumental contributions for the development and good of Goa in the Portuguese Parliament, asking for funds, etc. So, when we our surname, for example, all the freedom fighters, they had a kind of an Indian orientation in their philosophical thinking. They put Indian names for their children, like my name is Sushila, my siblings are Jahan, Jay, and Babu. And the surname Savant was included in our baptismal certificates because we were Savants before the
Yeah.
Portuguese converted us to Christianity. So
It is a Maratha
my
Kshatriya surname.
Yes, it is. In fact, my father has written articles about the Asolna Veling Kunkolni, the Kshatriya belt, so to say, being like
Yeah,
the
and
Punjab
very
of Goa.
yeah, yeah, ma'am. And in fact, these were very highly placed feudal lords and chieftains, the Savants. So they had
Well,
quite a big authority also. Savants had a lot of authority.
with the more than 400 years of the Portuguese in Goa, all that authority had almost disappeared, Kirti. So that may have been in the pre-Portuguese era.
Yeah,
So,
as
but
Savants.
the yeah, Portuguese, in fact, were very good collaborators with the Goans. in terms of, so many things that they did. So now a lot of new archival work has been brought up to show how the Portuguese used the Goans, and I would not say used, but collaborated with the Goans to, prolong their rule in Goa. And so, uh, the Portuguese, of course, when we look at the history of Portuguese in Goa, we look at the good first, and we cannot ignore the bad, because for those families whose only bread winner, the person who worked was incarcerated in the jail. The family had to look, the mother had to look after the children. It was a joint family system in some Hindu families, but that kind of buttressed the whole economy. The selling of the produce, the agricultural rice, the jackfruits, the mangoes, this helped the Goan families. So uh, nobody, they say, starved in Goa. Maybe there were a few cases in the tribal belt where there were possibly starvation deaths, but they were not in the mainstream. Where in
Yeah,
my
you did not have Mr. Churchill there who starved millions in India to take the grains to Europe and to the
Yeah,
British.
so the famine, was more in British India, and the Jallianwala Bagh may not have happened in Goa, except for those incidents in Patra Devi and in other parts of the border, where the members of the Goa Vimochan Samiti, unfortunately, Indians, not even Goans, a young Punjabi Sardar Karnal Singh uh, was shot dead for Goa. And today we are talking about Goans, non-Goans, and there were people in Patra Devi who were shot dead. And understand, Kirti, it was such a terrorizing situation that those who were shot dead, people were scared to go and give them first aid. It was the journalist with white skin, which the Portuguese will not shoot, went to Patra Devi and brought the shot people to give them first aid. It was such a situation there in the
There
satyagrahas.
were several
So
women in that, no? In that Patra Devi protest. There were
there
several
was
women also.
the Goa Vimochan Sahayak Samiti had a number of women. One of the Bengali MPs, she was shot, but unfortunately it hit her arm, not her heart. And in the 46 movement, Kirti, I think we are a little bit digressing from the Goa Revolution Day
Yeah, I
history.
wanted to
But
come
in the
back, Doctor. Yes.
yeah. In the 46 movement, there were a number of women who were real bravehearts. In the 46 movement, you have Vatsala Kirtani, you have Ratan Kaunte, who is today a gynecologist and is living. She's more than 90 years now. Shashi Bandodkar, then Shanta Borkar. She gave her gold bangles to the meetings in Bombay, which Dr. Lohia addressed much after the 46 movement, and to carry on this movement. And Ratan Shirodkar, there are a woman called Painginkar, lot of women, and they were brave. And in fact, Vatsala Kirtani said, like you say, Viva Salazar, we say Jai Hind. It is the same kind of a slogan that we raised. In fact, in the 46 movement, uh, the the people were so many in Margao that when the news was that Dr. Lohia was not allowed to deliver his speech, Dr. Juliao were arrested, they went outside the police station in Margao, which is still existing there in the same location today. And they started shouting slogans. There were Prabhat ferries around the Margao Municipal Garden, which is very near to the police station, because this was in the evening around 4 o'clock, and the whole uh, thing went on after dark. In fact, the Portuguese begged of Dr. Lohia, requested him to go out of the police station and request the crowd to cool down and go home. They were unable to handle the crowd of the big
Yeah.
numbers. So
But
Dr.
basically the police had tried, actually the Portuguese had tried to stall this meeting on 18 June by when they got wind that Dr. Ram Manohar Lohia is going to speak against Dr. Salazar's fascist regime, no?
see,
They had
see,
mandated all the passengers to use cab services, and those who use
see,
those cab services must first be brought to the police station.
there was a strict enforcement to see that the meeting would not take place because, as per the Portuguese law, protest meetings were not permitted as per the law. So the
Yeah.
civil liberties were not permitted. You didn't have the right
See,
to speak freely,
yeah, he
which
arrived
Dr.
by
Ram.
a horse carriage, no? Lakshmi Das
uh,
Borkar took him by a horse carriage secretly.
See, the thing
And
is that by the time he came from 10th in Asolna, by the time it was 14th, the news was very clear that Dr. Manohar Lohia had come to Goa, and the news was clear that he's going to address a protest meeting. So after 14th, 15th, Dr. Juliao and Ram Manohar Lohia moved to Margao. And then they had meetings there. The students' wing met him. They had meeting in a place of Dr. Shah, of Mr. Jaginlal Shah in Panjim, a flat there where the people overflowed onto the streets. So meetings were held as preparatory grounds, and on the day of the meeting, they had to hide themselves. So they took a room in Hotel Republica in Margao, which is not far from the site, and then came by horse carriage to the ground itself. Ironically, that ground today is called Dr. Lohia ground. It was
yeah,
a simple open space next to the uh, um, place where there was a chapel. Today there is a church, Our Lady of Grace. So there were no roads, and the present topography was different. But even today, it is a meeting place for protest meetings. But today, of course, sometimes when you apply for permission, the permission is not granted for protest meetings. At that time, Dr. Loya never asked for permission, and he just had a meeting. So today, the situation is slightly different, where movements in Goa they apply for permission at Azad Maidan, at Loya Maidan, and the permission is refused because of the public outcry against some policies of the Town and Country Planning Act. But coming back to Dr. Loya, he came in a carriage. People welcomed him. Besides all these Lakshmindas freedom fighters, Lakshmindas Bembre, and all these other people who carried on the movement after him, he had prepared a speech. He went and said a few words, but he was not allowed to deliver the speech. So he was immediately arrested. He understood that that is going to happen in the present situation. And he was arrested along with Dr. Julia Menezes. Everybody had come with prepared texts, but they were arrested. Thereafter, there were many meetings where
they were
poets
let
like
off the
Baki.
next morning, no, doctor? They were
Well,
let off the next
the Portuguese wanted Loya out of Goa as soon as possible. The more Loya stayed in Goa, the worse it was for the Portuguese. So he was taken to the Colin railway station, the border, and he was handed over. He was told not to come back to Goa, which Dr. Loya never adhered to. He came back in September, and he was incarcerated in Agua jail for about 10 days from 20th to 2nd of October. At that time, the Portuguese, of course, took him to the border and handed him over to the British representative. And thereafter, of course, Dr. Lohia never came to Goa, but he
It
had
gets started as
countless
fine.
meetings.
Mm.
No, he himself had countless meetings outside Goa, on the borders of Goa. So many places on the borders of Goa, like Kankumbi and Yellapur and
Yeah.
Kumta and, Halial, Nandgarh, Castle Rock, Londa, Khanapur, Ratnagiri, Kolhapur, Savantwadi, Karwar. These are on the borders
Mm.
of Maharashtra and
Yeah.
Goa. And so he had meetings, he came for meetings to Bombay also. So the
Mm.
why I'm calling it the spark, the thingy that lit the fire, was because one of the last documented meetings that Dr. Loya had was somewhere in I think 1959, on 8th January 1959, where he there is a report of George Was, a communist general secretary of the communist of the Goans People Party, in the Sunday Chronicle, that makes mention of Dr. Loya condemning another Goan freedom fighter, which of course proves that for some point of time the Goan freedom fighters were also not united. But one of the important things that happened in August, this was in June, that the freedom fighters met in Belgaum, in Tilakwadi. Dr. Loya could not come because he was in Nepal, and Dr. Loya, of course, was a fearless man. He was put in jail so many times, not only by the Portuguese, but by the British, by the Nepali government, by even Pandit Nehru's government in independent India. Pandit Nehru called him a Mawali parliamentarian because of his attacks in the parliament. But of course, as a personal level, he had the best of respect for Dr. Loya. In fact, when Dr. Loya died very young, Pandit Nehru went out of his way to provide medical facilities at the AIMS. So that was a political,
Yeah. Ma'am,
tete a
maybe
tete.
before we run out of our time, I wanted to touch on a few things. Like this same 18th June meeting, the fallout was that in December, Dr. T.B. Kunia, Purushottam Kakwadkar, Rama Hegde, Lakshmikant Bhemre, all these were sent on long-term prisons and deported to Portugal. I also
See,
have read this book of the trial
trial,
of the four.
TP.
And these
Yeah.
four were also incarcerated via Angola, another colony of the Portuguese, which is an African colony. And it was from there that then later on they were sent to Lisbon. And the military courts had tried them and they had rather harsh treatment. That's why the book that Pandurang Shirodkar wrote was Maji Janmathe Kala Neela Pani. I don't know why he says Neela, but that's something like akin to the Kala Pani of the British in Port Blair. So a
Yes.
lot of things happened after this Kranti Divas. Is that it
Yes.
inspired so many civil disobedient movements inside Goa, apart from the armed struggles, of course, by the Azad Gomantak Dal and also a section of the RSS that
See,
helped in the
uh,
1854 liberation of
Kirti,
Nagar Haveli.
Kirti, what you have touched upon is a tip of the iceberg. I have written
Yeah.
an article about 40 years ago in 1989 in a book, the first book, Essays on Goan History, where I have put in detail the contribution of Dr. Ram Manohar Lohia. So, right from the very next day, on 19th June, there was a hartal. Business establishments, commercial establishments closed down. There were people in who had meetings, spontaneous meetings. The hartal extended to the villages also. Dr. Julia Menezes, Tiru Vaidya, Venkatesh Vednekar, Nilakanta Karapurkar, Das Borkar, Bakiba Borkar, the poet laureate of Goa, who composed songs on this. Manohar Sardesai, who was inspired to compose songs on the 18th June movement. So there were so many. There were thousands who were put into prison after 1946, not 10 and 20. And there were
And not
meetings.
just civil disobedience, also there were so many others who risked their lives, like the couple Libya Lobo and her colleague, who was later husband Vaman Sardesai, who ran that secret mobile radio station from jungles and hideouts, and until the
Yes,
liberation of
yes. No,
Goa.
everybody, including Libby and Vaman, did their contribution. In fact, Libby is over 100 years old. She's still living, and she's still a fighter of those yesteryears. About what is happening in Goa today. But from the 19th to the 20th June, you have TB Cunha, his niece Berta Menezes Braganza, Sanchez de Souza. I have date wise, I have chronicled the meetings and who took part in these meetings. On 21st, there was a Prabhat Fairy in a public meeting. There were speakers like Purushottam Kakodkar and others who spoke. Inyo Pimenta, Upendra Talaulikar, Umabai Shirali, Vande Mataram was sung. 22nd June, again a meeting was held in Ponda in front of the church. 23rd June, a meeting in Margao where TB Cunha was, in fact, that was the day when a lot of Margao people, South Goa, came together. Lakshmikant Bemre, Jose Maria Furtado, Armando Pereira, Cristóvão Furtado. Public meeting, demonstrations, rallies were organized almost every day. On 30th June, you have the famous meeting in Margao where TB Cunha was arrested, and that followed his trial, and he was finally in exile in Portugal, in Peniche, in the prison. And he said there his prison was like a university of learning, because remember, Kirti, the opponents of Salazar were also intellectuals in Portugal who were discussing how to overthrow the dictatorship of Salazar. So TB Cunha felt privileged to be in their presence to discuss with them. TB Cunha was an engineer by profession. He was an intellectual who wrote so much, including denationalization of Goans, a pamphlet. Then, besides that, on 8 July, Dr. Lohia issued press statements in Bombay. 13 July, 18th Prabhat Fairies were held in Margao again. Now, all this was in defiance of the existing laws of that period. At Mapsa, people were arrested. There were people who were arrested left, right, and center. In Londa, the conference was on 18th August, where for the first time the Goan nationalists came together. And Dr. Lohia did not come, but his persons like Achyut Patwardhan, the other socialists who were working with Lohia, they came to Londa, and they met the Goan freedom fighters like Inacio Loyola, Lakshmikant Bemre, Purushottam Kakodkar, and the National Congress Goa got united in August 1948, which was formed in 1928 but had problems of existence. This is a
Yeah,
time there was a solid body formed, and George wrote in his editorial article on on 14 June with regard to what was going to take place. A lot of people were conscientized. But besides all this, you find that right from thereafter, after the Londa conference, you have people who came and who decided that the Goa Vimochan Sahayak Samiti, people from other parts of India, Nana Saheb Gore, Shirubau Limaye, Rambau Tupe, Madhu Dandavate, all these people, the socialists, they formed this group, and they said, Lohia said in Bombay, 10 years later, even 46 to 53, not yet 10 years, before the satyagrahas of 54, 55, they organized that every 8th, 18th, 28th, there will be satyagrahas, and people gave their names at the protest meetings that we are willing to participate in the satyagraha. Now, satyagraha was a peaceful movement. It was with non-violent, but the Portuguese, for whatever reason, of uh, witnessing for the first time a group of people entering Goa with Gandhi topis and dhotis and kurtas, they were a little bit worried, and I would not say little bit, but whatever it was, they shot the satyagrahis during the satyagrahas, and then the movement continued, a follow-up movement in Bombay. Almost every hall in Bombay was booked, from the Sundarbai Hall to the Jinnah Hall to the Kama Oriental Hall to Gujarati Fobris Hall in Bombay, the ISI Hall. Yeah, so all these halls were booked from 47 till 48 to keep the movement, the momentum going in Bombay. Because a lot of freedom fighters had left Goa and they were stationed in Bombay, where they were publishing newspapers like Gomantak and other newspapers, Free Goa, Tibikunya. Now, today, of course, the government is doing a very good job in publishing the trials, so that the next generation knows whether the government has not only published Tibikunya, they've also published the trial of Jose Inacio Loyola, of other freedom fighters. So that is important, because why was T.B. Kunya arrested? Because he was addressing a press meeting. He was not press meeting, a protest meeting. So why was P.P. Shirodkar arrested? Because he wrote in the Free Press Journal, he reported what was happening in Goa. So the dictatorial regime was very, very aggressive. But of course,
But we are going to run out of time. So I
sure.
just wanted to,
I could only end by saying that we need to move on, and we need to study history in the correct perspective, and we need to see progress with the present Portuguese government and India and Goa. In fact, one of the leaders, he had a Goan parentage. The president of Portugal. And so there is so much to do now to move on. Researchers are working, but there is no vindictiveness today with the present Portuguese government. In fact, giving the Goans the Portuguese citizenship itself is something which other Indians do not have the same privilege. So they are giving scholarships to Goan students. I was a recipient of All India Scholarship of the Fundação Orient to stay in Portugal for 3 months and do my PhD. So a lot of affirmative action is taking place.
Yeah, actually, it's so interesting, and it's such a huge and vast topic, and we could actually go on and on. And for that reason, I suggest we should keep having some of these separate topics for podcast, later. So
no, I'm happy, Kirti, that the Goan story will reach India and the rest of the world. I'm very happy about that, because it's time to bring the history of Goa center stage.
True, very true. Thank you so much, Dr. Sushila Savant Mendes, for this insightful and enlightening conversation. We really enjoyed it. Your deep knowledge and passion for Goan history, and also the significance of Goa Kranti Divas that you explained so well, This really was very heartwarming. And the spirit of 18 June 1946 really sparked off something very big, and the effects are seen even today. We are grateful for your time and your valuable perspectives. Thank you once again, Dr. Mendes. Thank you
My
so much.
pleasure. My pleasure. Thank you also.